Well, I just hope that they'll be hearing me. And in fact, I'm seeing them. So let me say good evening to you once again, Dr. Fergus, and of course, Mr. Kambon. Good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening, my brother Ruskin. Good evening to your listeners on 91.1 FM. We are getting some
Yes,
noises.
greetings.
Yeah, and of course, good evening to all our listeners on social media, Facebook, and YouTube. Welcome back to the live edition of Indaba, where knowledge grows, a place where knowledge
Indeed.
grows, a program of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. And we are
Indeed.
your co-hosts. I'm Claudius Fergus and my brother, Shabaka Kambon.
Shabaka.
Over to you, Shabaka.
Brother, well, since we have been gone, a lot has happened, and there's no way for us to cover it all. But I think today is October the 8th, which means that yesterday was October the 7th. That's the second anniversary of the live streamed genocide of our lifetime. And in the time since we've been gone, the United Nations has declared that Israel is committing genocide against the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip. A UN independent International Commission of Inquiry on the occupied Palestinian territory has concluded it is official. Genocide is taking place in Palestine. And of course, the people of Europe, the masses of the people of Europe, the workers and so on, have responded with their feet. Tens of thousands of them across major cities in Western Europe have come out and denounced the complicity of their political and corporate elites in this genocide. You know, and so, you know, the question is, you know, what has Netanyahu done? What has he done to this country? What has he done to the whole idea of Israel? You know, taken the Jews themselves. What has he done to the Jewish people? You know, people who had gained such sympathy across the world, having been the victims of genocide themselves in Germany. Now, apparently, according to the United Nations and all the other human rights bodies, now the perpetrators of genocide in the Middle East. For our part, in the Caribbean, organizations like the Emancipation Support Committee and the Caribbean Freedom Project, we have done everything we can. We've signed every document we can. We have we've spoken out. We have marched ourselves to raise awareness of this issue. And of course, we could take some pride as a people having removed the three ships from the coat of arms, Columbus's three ships and his statue, making our position on genocide clear. We do not support, celebrate, condone genocide, whether present or historic, and so, you know, this is where we are, Doctor. Because I think that's the largest, the biggest thing that has happened in this time. Of course, tonight on Indaba, we're going to be talking with a very famous guest. We're going to be talking about what's happening in the region. Is the Caribbean going to become the next war zone in this increasingly volatile world? That's the question we're going to discuss tonight. And of course, we're looking forward to having Brother Manolo join us. But Dr. Fergus, I mean, that's the news that stood out for me. Perhaps you may want to add something to that.
Yeah, I want to add not news in terms of news, but as a historian, we also this month we would commemorate the historic genocides that occurred in this part of the world, the beginning on the 12th of October, a few days away from now. That was the beginning of the genocide of the indigenous peoples in this part of the world, and of course, followed by the genocide of African peoples, replacing the indigenous peoples. So it's a historic month for genocide. Commemoration,
Yes.
not celebration. We need to remind ourselves of that. We commemorate without celebrating. What we celebrate is the resistance to these tragic episodes in our history, in world
And of
history.
course, Dr. Fergus, you were just one of the organizers of a historic conference, on indigenous people and reparations. So perhaps you could just bring us up to speed in terms of how you felt that went. I mean, I know it ended yesterday.
Well, in terms of the actual conference, it went well organizationally. It was a challenge for us, which I wouldn't go into now, but it was a very good conference. We had representation from extending from Belize to Guyana, which is called French Guyana as well. Across the Caribbean, we were online as well as on site at the Nales Public Library, a beautiful facility in La Joqueta. And the attendance there was very good. On site, our keynote speaker was Professor Vereen Shepherd. We had a number of ambassadors on hand. A number of the chairs were online as well. And our guest this evening, Dr. Asha Kambon, brought up a sort of climax with the last session of the conference on women and empowerment. She chaired that session, and it was a great way to end the conference. Really, really great way to end the conference.
Excellent. And of course, the other thing that we would have missed, and perhaps maybe we'd come back to that conference in another edition of Indaba, but another thing that happened over the last few days there was the CARICOM Cuba Day Against Terrorism. I know this weekend on Sunday, a number of prominent people would have gone to the Piarco International Airport to lay a wreath there to remember that famous event of terror, which
1976. Yes.
Yes, here in 1976. A lot of Trinidadians are not aware of that, Dr. Fergus. Perhaps you could remind them what happened on that date.
All I remember vividly was that the Cuban, I think it was a flight heading for Barbados, that was bombed en route, killing everybody. And the hijacker, the bomber, actually took refuge in the United States, remained living in the United States under United States protection. I don't know if he's still alive, but he was living under United States protection. The United States refused to hand him over for trial in Venezuela. And that's as much as I clearly remember. But it was a time then I was old enough to be following the news as well. It was a very, very tragic moment.
Yes, so that was, we recognize that event. So there was that famous, and of course, the Venezuelan, the terrorist at the center of it was a man called Luis Posada Carilles.
Yes. Okay, so we have our first guest, Shabaka.
Yes.
We have our
Kadija,
first guest.
welcome.
None other than Kadija, looking as beautiful as ever. I didn't compliment you yesterday. You look very beautiful in the control room. By the way, Shabaka, not going back much, but the conference could not have been a success without Kadija and Renee behind the controls, controlling the webinar for us. Thank you both on this forum. Thank you both. Thank you both. We're extremely grateful to you. All right, so we have Kadija Dyer from the Secretariat that would tell us what's going on, particularly with the African History Quiz and Spoken Word competitions. Over to you, Kadija.
Hi, good evening, Dr. Fergus. Hello, Shabaka. Good evening, Ruskin. Good evening to everyone listening via the radio station, as well as those on YouTube and Facebook. So update from the Secretariat. So we are in October. which is Calypso History Month, and also the month where we start our National African History Quiz and Spoken Word competition. Last week we held both orientation sessions, and every year I say it's the best year, but this year the group of students is really amazing. I mean, the orientation session with Auntie Abio, there are videos online, and persons are just in awe at the students. The booklet is a compilation of stories, calypsos, speeches, but not just any stories. Those long time stories, like on a Sunday afternoon, where you sit with your grandparents. When last you heard a story about a Sukunia or Larger Bless? And some of the children don't know about our folklore. They have never heard about it before. So parents, we have some work to do, because that is how our stories are told. You tell the children stories, and they continue that from generation to generation. And each story there's a lesson to be learned. So it's not a story to get them frightened, to scare them, but there's a lesson to be learned in each story. So we have the competition coming up for the spoken word on the 22nd of October. That's the preliminary round. We have 24 students from 9 schools. And for the African History Quiz competition, we have met our goal of 20 schools. We have what we call our veteran schools, and also some newcomers to the competition. And the competition this year, we have some surprises in there. The children are excited about it. Again, the focus of the History Quiz booklet is reparations. And one of the students during the orientation session, we had them go through the booklet and present what stood out to them most. And one of the students from, I believe it's Mudset, she said that reparations is not just about money, about getting some US or getting some pounds. Reparations is righting that wrong. Reparations is acknowledging that wrong was done, and this is your way of making some kind of right. It will not erase what happened to our people, but it will acknowledge what your people did to my people. And I mean, that was so powerful that, a teenager, when a person said that, history is dead, where we keep bringing up this, but we have to, because they have to understand where they came from. They have to understand what is happening in the world today. And if we just put them out into society, they're going to be confused. They're going to be lost because they don't know why the world is like this today. Because everyone is shying away from it, or everyone is trying to protect them from it. But it does not give them the ability to navigate the world if they don't understand what took place before. And that is what we are doing with this quiz. So it's not that we are just keep bringing up slavery and what happened. We have to. And it cannot be a taboo subject anymore. We have to tell our history, and the right way of doing it also, because there's so much information out there that, okay, we just tell them, read a book, go to the library, pick up a book. But then when you ask them what they read, they're just regurgitating what they see in the pages of those books. And when you look at the authors of those books, they're not us. So how can somebody else tell my story? Why can't I tell my story? Why do I have to be afraid of being victimized to tell my story? So this competition gives the children that idea, gives them some sort of beginning. Okay, this is what happened, and give them the ability to go and further research, because not just what we give them in the booklet that they take for word, but they actually go and do their own research as well. And it's amazing. I mean, Dr. Fergus, you are judging the competition. Sometimes they come and tell you, but Miss, you left out this. I was like, okay, there's so much we can put in the booklet for you. But it's good that you're going, now and do your own research. I mean, one of the students coming from the history quiz, she took part in the reparations competition, and she also won an award. I mean, that's amazing. And she's a non-history student. And we are seeing that yearly that non-history students are taking part because they just love history. And we're also seeing it with teachers as well, where non-history students, history teachers, sorry, are bringing these students. So I just want to end by saying thank you for the students for taking up this challenge, but also thank you to the teachers, the principal, and parents for allowing our children to take part in something that is their own.
Okay, so Kadija, before you leave, I just want to make an announcement here. There is the second annual competition organized by the Center for Research, the Center for Reparations Research. Last year, Trinidad School won. The advertisement is out again. The deadline is the 28th of November to submit this. Let me just briefly read the ad, and you can perhaps help to disseminate. Okay.
Yes,
It says calling all high school debaters, all high school debaters. The International Reparations Debate Competition is back for its second staging, and it's open to all Caribbean and UK high school students, that's British high school students. Represent your school on the global stage and win major prizes. It says how to enter. Submit a 30-second video. So you can start preparing even before you see the details. Prepare a 30-second video, and you must submit that on the question, why do we need reparations today? That question is, why do we need reparations today? You have to register via a barcode, so you would need to see the ad itself. We will help to disseminate the ad, but that's as much as we can do. Perhaps you go online, look for the Center for Reparations Research, you should get it. UE is also partnering the repair campaign as well. So if you go to CRR, the Center for Research Studies, you should see the flyer there, and you can register from there. It's good to register early and then prepare your video. So you have to prepare the video, submit a video, 30 seconds only. So you have to do a lot of editing before you submit that. That's it. New competition this year on reparations. Thank you very much.
Before we move on to our next segment, let me just say, let me just go back to this this point here for the benefit of our listeners. On October 6th, 1976, American-sponsored terrorists Hernan Ricardo Lozano and Freddy Lugo bombed the Cubana Airlines Flight 455, which took off from Guyana on its way to Cuba, with stops in Trinidad, Barbados, and Jamaica. They planted the bombs here in Trinidad and Tobago, and they were captured before being released to the U.S. authorities by Trinidadian, authorities. On that vessel, you had 57 Cubans, 11 Guyanese students, 5 North Koreans, and notably 24 members of the 1975 gold medal winning Cuban fencing team. Many of them were teenagers. And of course, the bombing was organized by Luis Posada Carrilles and Orlando Bosch out in Miami, 2 famous terrorists. So that was perhaps the only event of its kind to take place in Trinidad and Tobago in our own history. So something for us to note and for us to remember as we call for this region to be a zone of peace. Over to you, Doc.
Yes. Do we have Dr. Kambon online? Yes. Okay, so welcome, Dr. Kambon. I think no introduction is necessary, except to say, of course, that you are in charge of a very important project, the African Heritage Agricultural Center, AFRA for short. And Dr. Kambon is, of course, a director, founding director of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago. We have addressed this project before. We will address it again from time to time. But for this evening, Dr. Kambon is going to give us an update. What's going on with Afra?
Thank
Welcome.
you very, very much. Thank you very much, Doc. And welcome and good evening to all our guests, both here and online and across the region. It's a real pleasure. We're at an exciting moment in the Afra project. We are about to begin the training. We are still interviewing our recruits. We are expecting a group, the first group of 20 young people from the cohort that we had been speaking about. That is what we call the NEAT group, not in education, not in employment, not in training. And they come from that historic area known as Yoruba Village. We are very, very excited, even by the young ones that we have interviewed already. They've got a lot of purpose, they've got a lot of hope, and it's our job now to deliver. The program, we are very, very, what shall I say, pleased that we've had the support of the First Citizens group. First Citizens came on board very early, and they have indicated their support for the project, and that has given us the wings on which we are able to fly. The University of the West Indies Faculty of Food and Agriculture is providing the technical support, and UWI has signed an agreement with us. We've been so I have to say we've been almost overwhelmed. We've received that much support that we were able to approach UWI, provide them with all the information about the project, and receive the support where they agreed to sign a memorandum of understanding with us to provide the kind of technical support that is required, the technical expertise, so that the young people, we can be assured that the young people will indeed receive the kind of climate smart agriculture that we hope they will be exposed to. The Ministry of Agriculture has also come on board, and they're going to be providing a number of special areas of focus. So all in all, I mean, it's looking good. We are going to be at the Cascade Community Center. There we thank the Ministry of Community Development for having that center and making it available so that the young people will be in a very spotless and clean and excellent environment. And we, of course, will keep it that way. I think we've got a wonderful group of facilitators, both in the life skills area and in the area of agriculture. I want to particularly thank the team that has made this happen. People are seeing my face, but I'm only the face. The team that makes this happen is our project coordinator. That's Brother Chika Mose. Chika Mose is coordinator of the project, and he's working tirelessly to make sure all the logistics are in place, to make sure that the facilities are available and ready for these young people. We have on board as well, we've had Sister Abidemi Swinkara. Abidemi is an agricultural scientist herself, a botanist, a farmer, graduate of the University of the West Indies, and Abby has given all of her time in the last, 6 or 8 months to ensure that we have the quality of program that we should have. As well, our life skills program officer is young Alejandra Mendez, and Ali, as we call her, has been doing tireless work to make sure that we have a life skills program that I think it has really, the content of it and the, the scope has gotten everybody quite excited and makes people recognize that, listen, we are serious about, we are serious about providing these young people with an opportunity to transform their own lives and the skills to make it possible.
Great. You mentioned something is going to be happening over the weekend, some activity, public
we actually
show of gratitude or something?
No, we begin the program on Monday. So Monday is a serious day for us. In the morning, we will have the formal opening of the program, and in the afternoon, we get down to work. This weekend, we do another round of interviews because some other young people have indicated their interest. And so we are not leaving anyone out. We are interviewing all the people who have indicated their interest, and we will see how best we can fit them in.
So where's the formal opening happening again?
At the Cascade Community Center in Cascade, and it's just beyond the School for the Deaf. If you've ever been to the School for the Deaf along the Cascade Main Road, the community center is maybe a door or two thereafter.
Who is invited and who is not invited to this?
All of our supporters, we have a number of stakeholders who've been with us from the beginning, like your good self, Dr. Fergus, who,
Thank you.
yes, of course, the opening will be conducted by our executive director, Sister Zakia Uzoma Wadada, will indeed present the opening remarks on behalf of the Emancipation Support Committee. We expect to have, of course, the CEO, the deputy CEO of the FCB group, who will bring greetings on behalf of the FC group of companies, the FC group. We expect to have with us as well the director from the Ministry of Agriculture, who's responsible for this outreach, who is making available to us these trainers. She will speak on behalf of the Ministry of Agriculture. If all goes well, the minister with responsibility for youth will be in attendance as well, and he will present the keynote address. Then we have a very special opening for the young people themselves. We call it Conversations with Youth. And
I was going to ask you about that one. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, indeed, yeah.
Who is a university UWI economist. He works in the Department of International Relations. But Dr. Niles also has another aspect of his life. He is the manager of Freetown Collective. And he's in the background, so we don't see much of him. But I would think that a lot of his interest in ensuring that young people have all the opportunities that they can carve out in this world are there for them. And so he will lead that Conversations with Youth section of the opening, and we look forward to that. That should be very exciting. The young people that we have interviewed, they made my heart sing when I met some of them last week when we were doing the interviews. And I really think that the conversations with young people will be very interesting, because these young people had a lot to say when we spoke with them. So I look forward to that component of the opening program. And then we will, of course, have lunch, and then the young people will be exposed to the work of the program. We run from the 13th.
We look forward to hearing the voices of these young people.
Yes, and we go till the 12th of December. We'll hear a lot of them during the program, but we look forward to hearing.
We'll want to hear some of them on the program too, at a future program.
That's right. Yes. They will be there on the opening day. We will hear their voices. So
right,
that's the way we've structured it. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kambon. And of course, we will get an update perhaps not long after that formal opening.
Yes, hopefully we'll be able to see from time to time how the program is going. You know, we really are looking for the best.
Indeed. Over to you, my brother. Thank you very much, Sister Asha. Shabaka, you're muted.
Yes, Doc, if I'm not mistaken, now we're going to invite our dear brother Manolo to join us on the program. I think he'll be joining us any minute now. Yes, there he is.
Renee, you can bring up Manolo. Okay, he's here with us.
How are you, my brother?
Happy to join you all tonight. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure to have you, brother. In these difficult times, to hear a voice of your international repute on this subject that is causing us so much consternation across the Caribbean.
Let me just read the context of the discussion this evening before you continue, Shabaka. Right. So the theme of the discussion is, the question is the Caribbean the next war zone? And the rationale for asking that question is that we have seen quite an increase in the military presence of the United States in the Caribbean. I think everybody is aware of that. And of course, it continues its attack on the sovereignty and democracy of Venezuela in particular. Most recently, the United States Navy has attacked two Venezuelan boats. I think it's three now, at least three, accused of trafficking drugs. And these attacks, of course, ended in massive fatalities with no evidence whatsoever provided either at the time of the attack or subsequently about any drugs whatsoever. And the U.S. action in the Caribbean, of course, is a challenge to CARICOM, because CARICOM has a position that the Caribbean is a zone of peace, and that leaders of several CARICOM nations have also expressed their deep concern over what is just not the presence of the military, but an expansion, the continued expansion of this military presence. So we want to do an overview of that, the action of the U.S. in the Caribbean, the U.S. military, Trinidad and Tobago's position, and the steps that CARICOM can take to ensure that the Caribbean does not descend into warfare and remain a zone of peace. So our guest, Manolo De Los Santo. Manolo De Los Santos, founder and executive director of the People's Forum in New York, researcher at Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. He's a writer, publishing very regularly. I will just name some of his recent publications. Viviremos, Venezuela versus Hybrid War. And he has produced two volumes on speeches of Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez, selective speeches of Fidel Castro. And that is, the main title of that is Comrade of the Revolution, and selected speeches of Hugo Chavez, the main title of which is Our Own Path to Socialism. So there we have it, our main guest for this evening. Welcome to the program, Senor Manolo De Los Santos. Over to you, Shabaka.
Okay, so I want to start off first. The only thing I think I want to add to Dr. Fergus's introduction is that our own Prime Minister, Kamala Persad-Bissessar, has praised the U.S. strikes on boats in the region suspected of carrying drugs, or that is the suggestion. And in fact, she's leveled a critique at the progressive movement across the region as, suggesting that the only people who need to be concerned about these strikes are drug traffickers, people involved in illegal activities, because this has nothing to do with Venezuela. Now, since she's made those statements some weeks ago, the New York Times has come out with a series of articles in which they claim to have interviewed top U.S. officials who suggest to them that there is much more going on here than the war on drugs. And I'll just give you the latest article from September 29th, 2025. I don't think that's the latest, but it's one of the latest, where the New York Times says that there is a push by top aides to President Trump to remove Nicolas Maduro as the leader of Venezuela. And this has intensified in recent days, with administration officials discussing a broad campaign that would escalate military pressure to try to force him out. Brother Manolo, please help us make sense of this dichotomy. Is this a war on drugs, as the U.S., as some members of the U.S. administration has claimed that they're trying to stop drug trafficking being led by President Maduro himself, who they've put a bounty of $50 million on his head? Or is there something else at stake here?
Well, again, thank you both to both of you for having me on this program. I think that we're seeing a threat of war against Venezuela that's completely based on false premises. The first premise that this is a war on drugs, like you mentioned, and many have commented, Trump himself, Marco Rubio, even the new Secretary of War, Hegseth, have all pointed out that Venezuela, in their opinion, is a main contributor to the drug trade in the Caribbean and into the United States. But their own reports, their own facts, their own data provided by the United States government defeat this lie. The reality is that Venezuela, in fact, is not a major producer of drugs. It is not even a major transit point for drugs. The biggest transit points for drugs in Latin America are not even the Caribbean, but are actually countries on the Pacific coast, particularly Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru. 3 countries that have high-level military agreements with the United States, countries that all share in common the regular presence of U.S. military bases, 3 countries that all have major agreements with the United States' own drug enforcement agency. Yet, over 85% of all drugs coming out of Latin America into the U.S. go through these 3 countries. Less than 5% of it goes through Venezuela. So that's the first false premise. The reality is, at the end of the day, that the real agenda of the United States government and the real threat to peace is that Venezuela is the holder of the vastest resources of oil, not just in Latin America, but in the world.
Yeah, but brother, before we go there, let's stick to the question of the premises. One of the other premises that we've heard is that Nicolas Maduro is an illegitimate president, and that he has been the last election was a fraud, according to the New York Times article. 70% of the population in Venezuela voted for the opposition. In fact, and the opposition being in this case, they said not just the opposition in general, but specifically Mr. Gonzalez, Edmundo Gonzalez. Can you speak to that claim?
Well, I think that's a very important claim to debunk, because the reality is that Venezuela, as many people in the region know, has a long history, at least going back to the year 2000, of holding regularly accountable and transparent elections in a system that has already been lauded by multiple international observers as being one of the most efficient and transparent electoral systems in the world, to not just say the region. Some might say the last elections were contested, but I was an observer in Venezuela myself during the elections, and I could attest that, one, there was ample participation in the electoral process by both opposition candidates and parties representing the democratic right-wing forces in the country. And secondly, that there was ample participation by voters opposed to the government of President Nicolas Maduro. And in fact, the election results as presented by the Venezuelan Electoral Council, which is independent of the executive arm in the country, presented a result that actually reflects the reality of the country. A deeply divided country in which you have a significant portion of the population that voted against Maduro and the ruling Socialist United Party of Venezuela. I think it was a credible election. The more worrisome thing, which is similar to the question of the claims around the war on drugs, or that Venezuela is a major transit point or producer of drugs, is that at the end of the day, who determines that the U.S. is in fact the police officer of the world that can determine whether one country's elections are fair or not? Who determines that the United States is the ultimate drug authority on the planet? No one has determined this. This is a self-abrogated right that the US claims to essentially dictate and monitor the affairs of other countries.
Indeed, and of course, what really concerns me is that these claims about both sets of claims that you've raised, that we've raised on tonight's program, are being voiced without evidence. I find a shocking lack of evidence. It's difficult to find any to support these claims. Have you been able to find any evidence from those who are making these claims that could give any degree of credibility to them whatsoever?
I mean, I've actually been pleasantly surprised in my research to find evidence opposing these claims within US data and research of their own. When I look at the reports produced by the Drug Enforcement Agency over the last few years, never in their last reports, going back as far as 2021, 2022, is there actually any mention of Venezuela as a concern to US national security, or even as a producer of drugs or as a transit point for drugs? The so-called Cartel de los Soles, which is being claimed as the cartel, the drug cartel that's led by President Nicolas Maduro, never once appears in US reports in the last few years. So one asks again, according to US data, according to US government's own reports, what evidence is there of this claim? There is none. And I think that itself demonstrates that this is nothing but a political charade, both to hide the US's own internal crisis and political dynamics within the country, but also to hide away the real objectives, the real intentions of the US's war threats against Venezuela.
Yeah, let me address an issue here. We should, of course, talk about that, the oil factor in all of this, but I want to ask you about the reality of an attack. How realistic is the possibility that the US would actually launch a missile strike on Venezuela, perhaps against the strategic facilities, or even a strike to assassinate Maduro? And or perhaps instead of a missile strike, launch an actual commando type invasion, or even on a larger scale like they did in Panama in the 1980s, where thousands of troops were involved just to kidnap one person that they call extrajudicial rendition, that fancy term, but it's kidnapping. They kidnapped one person, just one man they wanted, and they launched a massive invasion as if it was an actual war. Now, I don't know if you can consider that war, but it was an invasion of Panama just to get one man. What is a realistic possibility? How realistic is it that this can actually happen? Or is it that the United States is just trying to pressure Venezuela into removing Maduro?
I think at this moment, we have to consider the possibility of US strikes or US invasion of Venezuela as very high. The reality is that we're looking at a US government, the Trump administration, that is capable and willing, as we've seen, not just looking back at what happened in Panama in '89, or even looking at what happened in '83 against Grenada, but currently, in the last 6 months, we've seen how the US government has actively engaged in a war with Iran, has actively engaged in conflicts in the Middle East, has demonstrated it has no sense of composure or desire to negotiate or engage in diplomacy, and uses war as a way to actively create the sort of, I would say, to reset the terms and conditions of talks between countries. So the possibility is very high. I think the real question for us that it raises is at this point is, what are the implications of such attack or strike on Venezuela? Because in these moments, an attack on Venezuela that either strikes out or, as you said, the concept of kidnapping a political leader, in this case, a president of Venezuela, and extraditing him to the US forcefully, would create a serious political crisis within the country, but also, I would say, within the region. It would open up the region to conflicts involving paramilitary forces. It would create a situation similar to what we've seen in other parts of the world, a balkanization of the region as it shifts towards conflict between different groups, and many times sponsored itself by the United States government. So I think the consequences of such a strike are really the ones we should be fearing about, because ultimately it's something that wouldn't just be contained to the geographical borders of Venezuela, but would actively spill into the rest of the Caribbean and Latin America.
Indeed. Well, Brother Manolo, the Foreign Policy in Focus group, which is a product of the Institute of Policy Studies, seems to agree with you that there is an imminent threat. Today, they published an article entitled, "Is American Carnage About to Spread to Venezuela?" And in that article, they suggest a motive for President Trump to pursue such action. They say that every autocrat needs an enemy who threatens the country, preferably from both sides of the border. Such an enemy can serve as the reason to suspend the rule of law and boost executive power. And of course, in this article, they point to the fact that the current administration is involved in such a war now in democratic-controlled cities in the United States of America, and that President Maduro seems to fit the bill best, outside of the borders of the United States of America to wage such a campaign. How would you comment on this, brother?
Well, I fully agree with this analysis, and I've written articles in the last few weeks that point to this connection between the two. I think that the Trump administration has, in fact, created or manufactured enemies, fictional enemies, which Trump calls Antifa in the United States, which is a non-existent organization. It's a boogeyman that the White House invokes constantly in order to justify the militarization of policing inside the United States. And the same in connection with Venezuela. They have created a monster that doesn't exist in the form of the drug cartels in order to declare essentially a war on a non-existing enemy that gives them unprecedented powers and ability to wage war on the peoples of Venezuela, and I would say the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. And I think this is the behavior of a rogue state. This is the behavior of war criminals. You referenced earlier the extrajudicial murder in international waters of Venezuelan fishermen. Up to this point, by my count, there have been 5 of these extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean Sea. At this point, amounting to 21 people who have been summarily executed.
Okay, as you said that, let me interject a little bit, Santos. We have a comment from Corey Jilks, who said actually 4 boats. I said 3, he said 4. 4 boats have been destroyed to date. And he commented that the UN Office on Drugs and Crime has explicitly stated there's no connection between Maduro, his government, and drug cartels. And as you said, he's confirming here 87% of the narcotics enter via the Pacific and not Venezuela. So that's a comment from one of our audiences online. Yes. So go ahead.
No, my last comment to add to this is that it just again demonstrates the illegal and extrajudicial manner in which the Trump administration is behaving. If they say, if it were in fact true, which there's no way of confirming it at this point, that these so-called fishermen were in fact drug traffickers, the appropriate avenue would have been to arrest them, to investigate their so-called crimes in a way that is transparent and accountable according to the law. But they have destroyed all possibilities for this and have it's essentially created the grounds for a series of even more illegal actions within the region of the Caribbean and Latin America.
Yeah, Brother Manolo, Dr. Fergus, I'm interested in pursuing this line of question for a minute because of the local audience, and people I meet on the street don't quite understand the perils involved in this kind of extrajudicial activity. When it comes to what we call quote unquote criminals, there's a sense that perhaps it's a difficult problem to solve. We haven't been able to do it by other means. Perhaps there is some justification for becoming more extreme in our approach. Can you guys speak to the danger of this approach to addressing so-called criminal activity or criminal activity? How would this?
The danger I see, and I think you rightly point out, is that if we accept that the Caribbean Sea is a hunting ground for U.S. naval forces to engage in a so-called war on drugs by indiscriminately shooting and attacking any vessel they see and that they esteem to be a drug trafficking vessel, then it opens up for attacks on anyone in a policy which is basically shoot first, ask questions later. At this point, weeks into this process, we still don't know even the full identities of the 21 people who have been killed so far in these drone strikes.
Yeah, what concerns me, Manolo, what concerns me is the damage this does to the rule of law when you have the most powerful country in the region, in the hemisphere, applying these standards to its fight. We know the reports coming in from, as I say, even the New York Times are suggesting that this is much more than a war on drugs. But the example, this specific example of a way to tackle criminal activity being given, being doled out in the Caribbean Sea, seems to me that it must have some impact on the way we conduct. And when I say we, I mean people of Latin America and the Caribbean. The example that is being given seems dangerous, irresponsible, and I shudder to think that it could become, an example that other communities, countries, authorities would like to follow. I know that the current administration in Trinidad and Tobago, in its early days, expressed some interest in the Salvadorian model of justice. And so, it seems that, there are those in authority in the Caribbean, in Latin America, who can be persuaded that this type of activity is okay. It's right and just if it's demonstrated by the hegemon in the region.
And this is absolutely dangerous because it definitely chips away at even the most basic and rudimentary concepts of human rights, of equality in front of the law, of basic ability to say that we are innocent until proven guilty. But even worse, I think the fact that any state, whether it's the United States or even Trinidad or any country in the region, could assume the prerogative, particularly in international waters, to commit crimes like this, where they absolutely, without any data, without any intelligence, and without even detaining people to investigate, take the right to strike first, is extremely dangerous. It essentially sets the ground for a widening regional conflict, where countries without respect for the rule of international law, let alone their own domestic law, their own domestic constitutions, simply take the right to kill into their own hands. It's an evil monopoly on violence that has to be challenged at this moment in history.
Okay, at this time, we want to welcome our brother David Abdullah, who is taking in the show this evening. Of course, David has addressed this issue time and time again. Welcome to the show, brother David. We are getting to the top of the hour when our listeners on 91.1 may be leaving us. So we want to thank them one time for joining the show, and see you again next week when we will be live again. A text just came up, Santos. I wanted to address it. Just landed 2 minutes ago. Breaking news. The U.S. has asked Grenada for permission to deploy military assets. I'm now getting it. I'm not saying that it is fresh in terms of just breaking, but that is what it says. Breaking news. Could you comment on that? Do we forget our history sometimes? I mean, we know what the United States did to Grenada, and that's not so long ago. That's it within the memory of most people, my age, and perhaps even yours. I don't know. But could you comment on that? What is at play here? We know the position of Trinidad and Tobago, but what is at play here when you have the two closest countries to Venezuela perhaps becoming military assets to the United States?
Well, sadly,
That
it
is spell
repeats.
imminent attack.
Well, I think it sadly repeats a shameful part of our history in which different countries in the region, in the past, when it happened with the invasion of Grenada, which was done actually with the cover of being an intervention by the countries of the Caribbean, even though we know very well that it was the main military force and sponsor of this invasion was the United States. It was led by the Reagan administration. But we see how the territories of different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean are essentially being used as the launching pad for imminent strikes against Venezuela. This is extremely dangerous. And it goes against the sovereignty of the peoples of the region of the Caribbean. Because it's not just a CARICOM statement that declares this zone to be a zone of peace. CELAC conference statements also point out to the region being a region of peace. And sadly, there are governments, I think, that diverge from this vision. It calls us to question, very importantly at this moment, that for the zone of peace to actually be real, there actually has to be a position of non-alignment. Even for governments that, for whatever reasons, may disagree or may have outstanding conflicts with the government of Venezuela, like the case of Guyana, it should never be used, these internal conflicts among countries in the region should never be used as an excuse to justify aggression and to be a launching pad for aggression on any other country in the Caribbean by the United States.
Okay, we have a compliment from Brother David, and he says to us that we must keep this issue alive. And Corey just added to his previous comment that the United States CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, is perhaps the biggest mover of narcotics in the region. And of course, we have heard time and time again how narcotics has been used as foreign policy by the United States. And of course, the main foreign policy agency is the CIA. Could you briefly comment on that for Corey Jilt?
Well, I think there have been many scholars and researchers that have written whole books and produced many documentaries and much material on this question. I think there's overriding proof about the role of the CIA and other U.S. intelligence agencies and other areas of the United States government in not just running the drug trade, but actively participating as distributors and runners of the drug trade in the world, not just in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean. But I think there's a more important fact to talk about right now, which is that for all talk, at the end of the day, the fact that the United States is the largest consumer of narcotics in the world really has to raise the question of the fact that this distribution of drugs within the United States wouldn't be able to exist without major networks of cartels in the United States. They insist in talking about cartels in Latin America, in the Caribbean. They insist on talking about the drug trade in the region as if it didn't have its origins and its safe houses and its banking systems in the United States. I think, in fact, reading the reports of the Drug Enforcement Agency in the United States, I've come to even understand that they themselves have raised this question, which is ultimately these networks operate within all 50 United States internally, domestically. If the fact that the US fails to address this but wants to wage war on the rest of the world for the drug trade is a problem.
Well said, brother. Well said. I want to just let our people in the background know that they can run this commercial for Afra. I've been given a note here. As soon as they are ready, let us know, and we will make a minute to run this commercial for this fantastic project of the Emancipation Support Committee. Okay, so we're going to do that now, and then we come back.
Yeah, and it's not too late, Shabaka. We should inform our listeners that the numbers to call are on your screen, there at the bottom of your screen, so you can send us a voice message, 90 minutes duration, on the WhatsApp. Do not call us on the WhatsApp, but you can text on the WhatsApp. So
Yeah, 90
it's not too
seconds.
late to get into the show. Let's hear what you think.
Hey,
So you can join the show by sending us your comments.
Yeah.
Yes,
And you're not in
Shabaka.
school or working? Nah.
And you're from Movan Lab until Belmont, Peter Mosilat?
Yeah.
Alright, well, I take the QR code.
This opportunity is for you.
Con 2355008. Something you awaits. Afra.
The African Heritage Agricultural Center.
Learn how climate smart agriculture can offer you new opportunities.
A 10-week training course from October to December this year.
My want, my more. All it. My want, my more.
The African Heritage Agricultural Center is a project of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, sponsored by First Citizens.
Yes, don't let these opportunities pass you by. Get in touch with the Emancipation Support Committee and find out how you can benefit from that program. Huh? Yeah, Shabaka, you were saying something.
Yeah, well, we know that Brother Manolo has written extensively on both Venezuela and Cuba. And we know that the Cuban government is also very concerned about the developments in the region, particularly as they seem to be, according to the New York Times and other sources, coming from ex-Cuban exile or part of that, Marco Rubio, who's a member of that Cuban community in Miami that also desires regime change in Cuba. But that's not where I want to go with this, Brother Manolo. This is we are on the cusp of the 100th anniversary of Fidel Castro. You know, I know that the Cuban authorities are preparing to celebrate his birthday. I know that groups from across the Americas are organizing themselves to go to Havana for grand celebrations next year. What would Fidel Castro have to say at a time like this were he still alive? And by the way, let me just quickly make a plug for the Cuban embassy here in Trinidad and Tobago, which is hosting an exhibit of photographs on the life of Fidel at the Nales Library in town. And so if you want to go and see those photos, I understand that they are fantastic, indeed, very, very special photographs, of Fidel from his childhood right up until the end of his life. you want to go and see those photographs, you can do so tomorrow at Nalis. What would Fidel have said at a moment like this, Manolo?
Well, I don't consider myself the type of person who can predict what Fidel would have said in this occasion, but we do know what Fidel said in light of the invasion of Grenada. We do know what Fidel said when Panama was invaded. We know what Fidel said constantly to the threats of intervention by the United States in the region, which is that it is the moment, it is the urgent need of the peoples of the region to come together to confront the threat of the United States government on their lives. Without the unity of the peoples of the Latin American Caribbean region, there is no chance to be able to not just confront, but to come out on the other side and build a project of life, a project of sovereignty or dignity for the region.
Right. So Fidel spoke of the importance of the agency of Caribbean people in the face of threats from some parts of the Americas. But let me ask, let's take this opportunity to pivot now to Venezuela. Can you speak to what President Maduro is doing in Venezuela in preparation for a potential attack by the United States of America? And what kind of measures is he taking, not just domestically, but internationally, to try to ward off the potential violence that we will all suffer from?
Well, I think President Maduro has acted on several fronts. One, which I think is extremely important, which has been to wage the information war, to actively share Venezuela's perspective to the international media, talk about the threat of war in a very serious and coherent way, and about what its implications and consequences are. Another important front has been that he has, despite the provocations by the US, despite the extrajudicial killings near Venezuela's coast, the president has insisted on wanting to have an avenue of dialogue and negotiations with the Trump administration. And it wasn't until, I would say, 2-3 days ago that the Trump administration formally said that it would close all avenues for dialogue, which is a worrisome sign. But throughout this whole process, Venezuela and Maduro have consistently asked for dialogue and negotiations as an alternative to war. Venezuela has no interest in going to war. But thirdly, I think this is an important thing to highlight, is that the Venezuelans are not interested in war, but they're also not afraid to defend their country. And I think across the political spectrum in Venezuela, there is a high level of consensus that any threat of invasion, regardless of where it comes from, is a threat against the livelihood of all Venezuelan people, whether they oppose the government or not. And a reflection of that consensus is the fact that over 8 million people have joined militias to defend their country across the country. And these are militias that are completely volunteer-based. They're made by men, they're joined by men, women, and youth from across the country and across society who represent, I think, a real desire of their country to defend peace, to defend their right to peace. And we really hope that this does not end in a bloody conflict on the people of Venezuela. But I also get a sense that they are showing a fierce level of determination, that they are not going to be intimidated by the Trump administration.
But Manolo, with respect to CARICOM, and I'm not sure that CARICOM has made as strong a stand as it could have made early and as early as it should have. I know individual voices are speaking out, but as CARICOM declared from the position of whoever is in the presidency now, the rotating presidency, I would have expected more frequent, voicing of oppositions coming from CARICOM and not the occasional objection. So what should CARICOM really be doing at this stage as an ongoing measure and strategy to deflect away from the American determination to invade?
Well, I think the first thing is that I think that's the expectation of many people across the Caribbean and in the region, that CARICOM should declare unanimously and really firmly oppose any threat of invasion or war against Venezuela. I think that there's also an expectation that CARICOM should not just declare its firm opposition, but it should also act immediately as a mediator between the US and Venezuela, that it should offer itself to be a voice of reason, a voice of dialogue to prevent all-out war. I think that we often forget that in the past, the Caribbean and CARICOM specifically has served as an important intermediary to resolve conflicts in the region. Even though the islands of the Caribbean could be considered small, I would say they hold immense diplomatic weight. And at this moment, if they were to come together, if they were to have a unanimous position and build consensus around opposing war, could actively play a huge role in preventing a bloody scenario.
Brother Manolo, let me, as we get ready to close the program now, one of the interesting things that I see, having observed this conflict for some time now, is the potential for the U.S. action, which is essentially to weaken or remove the government of President Nicolas Maduro, actually working to strengthen the government, as previous provocations and antagonisms have done. What would you say to that?
I think there's definitely some of that in the mix. I think that, again, like I was saying before, that the level of threat of war on Venezuela has, in a sense, united the people of Venezuela around a common purpose. And I think even figures of the opposition who again, have no mixed feelings about Maduro or the Venezuelan government, but now feel compelled to defend this government as the government of Venezuela. I think demonstrates that, again, U.S. foreign policy, which is so disconnected from reality, often fails in its objectives to change reality in Venezuela. All previous attempts, which have included coups, which have included interventions of many types, mercenary invasions, have all ultimately failed. And I think it's come to the point where I hope that the United States could come to its senses and understand that it simply has to live with its neighbors. It has to accept that its neighbors have the right to have different political systems. And that it is okay, because the US actually demonstrates this every day. I mean, I always, like to remind people that the US continues to trade and have actually strategic partnership with Vietnam, a country with whom it had a war and lost tens of thousands of soldiers to in the 1970s. Yet Vietnam is one of its top trading partners. And this is a country that's run by a communist party. And if it can do that, why can't it have normal relations, normal economic, political, and trade relations with Venezuela? I see no reason for it.
Yeah, and that brings me to the question of you emphasizing the political system question and over the question of resources. Which one is it, or is it a combination of both?
I think they're both important factors. I think that the U.S. as a decaying power is ultimately obsessed with the question of having complete control over oil and other natural resources in the region. But it also is equally obsessed with overthrowing the Venezuelan government, because it also sees the Venezuelan government as, in a sense, I would say, an impediment to the rest of its political objectives in the region. It sees Venezuela as, in a sense, the core of a political current or trend within the region towards the left. And that is, I think, indisputable. Which one of the two gains more precedence right now? I think both of them. I think both of them do, really. It's to the point that the US is covering it all up with this whole, question of the war on drugs, because it actually ultimately knows that within the US public opinion, there is no support for a regime change operation in Venezuela. There is no support, like they did with Iraq, of going in another war for oil. There is little support for it within the American population. So they have to come up with a manufactured crisis, a manufactured tale, in order to sell the idea that US troops have to take action in Venezuela.
Wow.
Okay, let me ask you this question, Manolo. I want to shift the focus a little bit. Now, you touched on the boundary dispute, but you didn't elaborate. The award, the arbitrary award, as it is called, the anniversary was last week, and Venezuela declared its commitment to regaining what it calls its territory, sovereign territory that was cheated. Of course, that could be another pretext for American military intervention. But the question I want to ask you is this. Do you think that this dispute between Venezuela and Guyana might account for the divided loyalties within CARICOM with respect to the U.S. militarism?
I think the conflict over the Essequibo is definitely one of the major factors that contributes to the lack of consensus and firm leadership by CARICOM over the question of the conflict with Venezuela now. I think, in fact, that there are countries in the region that have taken the conflict over the Essequibo as a cover, as the excuse to not sufficiently confront U.S. attempts to strangle Venezuela. And truly, in my personal opinion, it's a shame, because the question of the Essequibo is a question that should be resolved among the peoples of the Caribbean. It should be resolved between the people of Guyana and Venezuela in a way that meets the needs of both people, rather than using it as an artificial provocation that would allow the U.S. to intervene and determine the fates of the Caribbean. At the end of the day, the struggle of the Caribbean people going back 5 centuries has been for our right to determine our own fate, not for having empires determine that fate. And I think that is the call of consciousness right now. Are Caribbean countries, is CARICOM willing to sacrifice its sovereignty, its desires to be truly independent, simply to justify the lust, the greed of the United States in relationship to Venezuela?
Yes, Shabaka, you can take us to the end of the program.
I think that's a great point for us to close on now with 1 minute left in tonight's Indaba overtime, Manolo. I think you've made a strong case. Now I'm worried about you getting deported.
I don't mind. if I have to get sent back home. I'd love to be back in the Caribbean.
If they offer you El Salvador, come to Trinidad, Manolo. We welcome you here.
We want to congratulate Ruskin for staying on with us. Huh? I think Ruskin is still with us. So thank you very much, Ruskin, for participating in the program up to this point in time. And a final comment from Corey, expressing concern about our own shipping lanes against this backdrop of American militarism in the region. So yes, it's an ongoing discussion. As David Abdullah said, we got to keep discussing this issue. It's not an issue that we have to think about in the Far East or the Middle East. It's right in our yard, not backyard. It's in our yard. It's in our front yard. And particularly with respect to Trinidad, because anything happens in Venezuela is going to affect us massively. Not just Caribbean, but Trinidad in particular is going to suffer massively from whatever happens in the Caribbean in terms of migration, in terms of our economic situation and all of that, because we have shared oil resources with Venezuela, and it is something even frightening to contemplate. So, Shabaka, take us to the end. And
yeah, just on our behalf, Dr. Fergus, on behalf of the Emancipation Support Committee and the Caribbean Freedom Project, Brother Manolo, we want to salute you in your courage in speaking truth to power, in the belly of the beast, as some people say. And to wish you and your colleagues and friends and so on all the best in this difficult and challenging time, and your family. Take care, brother. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on this edition of Indaba. Thanks for your contribution to the conversation here in the Caribbean. Yes, indeed. And we want to thank, of course, all our guests tonight on Indaba and encourage people to join us again next week, Wednesday, for another edition of the place where knowledge grows, the place to find consensus, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. Good night.
Hey, so are you 16 to 24 years old? Yeah. All right. And you're not in school or working? Nah.
And you're from Moval until Belmont, Peter Mosilas?
Yeah.
All right, well, I take the QR code.
This opportunity is for you.
Con 2355008. Something you always. Afra.
The African Heritage Agricultural Center.
Learn how climate smart agriculture can offer you new opportunities.
A 10-week training course from October to December this year.
My want, my more. All it. My want, my more.
The African Heritage Agricultural Center is a project of the Emancipation Support Committee of Trinidad and Tobago, sponsored by First Citizens.